crane collapsed in downtown St. Petersburg during Hurricane Milton, leaving a gaping hole in an office building that houses several businesses, including the Tampa Bay Times. Luckily, no one was injured, but the damage was extensive. The day before, Mayor Ken Welch warned residents in the area that the cranes could topple in high winds. However, as the Tampa Bay Times reports, in Florida, city leaders do not have the power to mandate how contractors prepare their cranes for a hurricane. In fact, no one in the state does. Here's what Governor DeSantis said about regulating cranes that are in the path of a hurricane.
Well, I think the question is, should there be more regulation or should there just be more common sense? Do we have to regulate everything? I think most people take the cranes down, right? I know, Kevin, isn't that the standard practice? I don't think we've had to mandate that.
The building officials should.
Yeah, and so you have building officials, you have other people that are there. And so, it's like, do you have to really kind of like crack down from the state to do it? I would hope not. And I think most of the time in Florida, that is handled very appropriately. But I think it just takes a little bit of common sense.
And Mark, the crane hit the building where the Times is located. Was anybody injured? That's my first question. But the second question is, the governor says, do we have to regulate everything?
Well, yeah, fortunately, no one was in the building. We were all out covering the storm. But look, if you've got hundreds of tons of steel hoisted hundreds of feet above your head, left to whir around in hurricane winds, you'd think somebody would be out there trying to protect the public to make sure something bad doesn't happen. The governor said that common sense is that people take these cranes down. Nobody took those cranes down. Nowhere around Tampa Bay did cranes come down. He also talks about the common sense solution. Well, common sense didn't prevail in this case, and who's to say it's going to happen the next time? Another key point, Rob, is that there's only one government agency that has any oversight over cranes, and that's OSHA, but only as it relates to crane operators and people who work on construction sites where cranes are located. If you live in a building nearby, or if you work in a building nearby, there's nobody there protecting you. And I have to say, here we are 2 weeks later, and I was just down there yesterday. It looks like a war zone on First Avenue.
That's what I was going to ask you. Do the photos show the actual extent of the damage?
They've been great, but they don't do it justice. Yeah. It's horrible to see what's happening there.
Tara, what do you think about the governor essentially taking the Republican position that we don't really need to regulate business as much as we do, and we don't need to regulate this?
The public has a reasonable expectation for the state to help set the standards for public safety, especially during a hurricane. But I find it really interesting that the governor doesn't want to regulate the cranes, but he wants to regulate my body, and has inserted himself into the whole discussion about bodily sovereignty with the abortion amendment. So I don't think he's very believable in this way, and certainly if his donors were related to wanting to regulate cranes, he might have a different interest.
Craig, there's been a push in Tallahassee to take away power from local government to do any sort of regulation. That's been going on for years. Do you think there's any will in Tallahassee to maybe regulate and say to crane operators, you got to take them down before a storm?
I think the preemption prevails. Look, this is a case study. You have a city in St. Petersburg that exists along one of the most vulnerable coastlines in the world to hurricane damage that also is going through a lot of vertical development. So cities that say they may need more autonomy and are more attuned to particular issues of their community could say they should have that leeway, but the prevailing sentiment in Tallahassee is, one, not to regulate, and two, not to give those local communities those powers. And the governor is right in saying that there should be more common sense, absolutely. But the reason that we have safety laws and regulations is because common sense can be in short supply from top-heavy toddler furniture and people who text and drive probably as we speak.
Yeah. Mark?
2 weeks later, here we are, not a single government agency is even investigating to get to the bottom of how that crane toppled over. And I find that astonishing.
It is. All right.